Welcome, welcome, welcome. You're listening to the Ask Brien radio show on KHTS 1220 and 98.1 FM. Well, we've been doing this show for over 7.5 years. Long time. And each week we try to either have somebody here that knows something about a business subject or has started a company and has taken it to a certain level where they're scaling and created something. We're trying to teach you something about business. And each week we have an exclusive guest. Today we have a very interesting guest as well. We're going to get to him shortly. But everybody wants to know. In fact, our guest even was asking, why is your show called Ask Brien when your name is Peter? I don't get it. And then why do you spelling Brien, B-R-I-E-N? You're not Irish. You're not O'Brien. So, he was asking me that question. I was like, I don't know. But we have a resident expert, don't we, Traci?
Yes, I would be considered the resident E expert. Thank you very much for that introduction. And yes, it is Ask Brien with an E because, well, of course, we have to start out giving kudos to our engineer.
Thanks, Trace.
Who always just does an exceptional job, if I do say so myself.
Thank you. Very
and moving on from that, E, the Ask Brien radio show is all about the experts. And not just experts in E's, and not just experts in engineering, but also experts in their designated business field or category or business niche. And we even have a really fun mathematical formula to go along with that, which is typically when you are starting a business, you are investing a significant amount of time. And an expert typically will have a minimum of 10,000 hours in their respective field. So that, if you do the math, is approximately 40 hours a week, 50-ish weeks a year. So that would take you about 5 years. But as we say every Thursday, no startup entrepreneur ever gets to work 40 hours a week. So that learning curve is definitely cut, we estimate, by about 3 hours. 3 hours, 3 years, whatever. I'm a little out of practice with the math. From 5 years to 3 years, but really, all that matters is that they are experts. So, what does that mean? Well, that means that we can shortcut your learning curve by you listening to the Ask Brien radio show because we're always focused on the education. And you're in for a real treat on today's show because we have some serious financial expertise for all the startups and entrepreneurs out there, and you were going to really want to hone in and focus on that. And boy, that just leads me to how enthusiastic we just are in general about entrepreneurship, right, Peter?
And don't forget, we're very, 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 very excited and full of energy. Woo, woo, woo.
All right, I guess.
And now our eardrums are busted.
Another E, eardrum.
Yes, or lack thereof.
And ego, ego of the host.
Ego, yeah. You should have led with that one.
Ego has hosts, but doesn't always have empathy, and
what does that mean?
Most unfortunate.
What does that mean, empathy?
Eardrums.
I never heard of empathy.
Exactly. If you have to ask, you probably don't know.
Hey, my shoes,
Right.
my foot will fit in any shoe, so I have that empathy
Yes.
covered. All right.
Yes, but you just don't seem to walk in anybody else's shoes. That's the challenge.
Except for Rocky, in the beginning of the show. And by the way, our guest is not too far from where Rocky was in Philadelphia, so we have to acknowledge that. And so he knows all about Rocky and the Rocky theme, correct?
Well, that's exciting. And so I think based on that, we should just get right into it. If you will tell everyone what my favorite E is, then we can get on the way.
Hey, I forgot.
No, you did not.
Well, I do remember the play, I do remember the movie, and I do remember someone named Olivia Newton-John, and I do remember they always were saying, grease lightning is what?
Electrifying, and so are we.
Woo! All right. And if our guest hasn't run to the rafters or run out of the
Yeah,
studio.
he hasn't exited the building, which is another E that I'm sure at some point a guest will do. We just haven't had that come to truth lately, at least.
Well, we'll find out in 10 seconds. Glenn, are you there?
I am here.
All right, you survived. You survived stage one.
Yes, I did.
You're still around. So, I had discussed yesterday with you. We had a prior call before the show, and we just want to know a little bit about your background before we start getting into the different things. So, if you can quickly go over your background prior to where you got to today, and then we're going to go over a couple of things about how people can figure out how to get cash flow and raise money.
Okay. Well, if you go way back, my background actually comes out of the sciences. So the analysis and particular paying attention to detail is a big part of science, and also it's a big part of business. In fact, business itself is a science in many ways. So I then, many years ago, too many years ago, we had a small brokerage firm that we had some traders on the options floors, and we funded them to trade the accounts and basically running a hedge fund at the time, and then moved on to doing some business consulting for companies that needed financing to expand. And these were very small companies at the time, companies that were sometimes less than revenues of $1 million. And at least that was small from our perspective. I know that there are companies smaller than that, and many of them that are very healthy companies. But for us, it was about $1 million and under. That was the beginning, and we, were cutting our teeth at the time. This is going back too many decades, but we were cutting our teeth at the time of going through learning the business community, the people in the VCs and the venture capital and private equity firms, the private lenders, and even the traditional lenders from the banking space. So that's what brings me to today. And then in this current day and age, we, myself and some partners, go into companies and help build out those companies through mergers and acquisitions. And prepare them, in some cases, to go into a public offering, not large billion-dollar public offerings, but these are smaller public offerings that put liquidity on the balance sheet. So we're looking at something in the order of $10 to $20 million of a public offering. But at the same time, we put together other equity capital that can come in on demand for those companies, and that's a little bit larger size. And there we're looking at, we'll put together agreements with firms that on demand basis, in smaller quantities, we can go out and get 50 to 250 million to supplement the original 10 or 20 that was originally raised. So we basically use a lot of structured instruments. Sometimes they're somewhat creative in the way that we institute them, as well as those same instruments are used when we're making purchases of these other companies. So pretty much anything that can be written on a piece of paper can be crafted. There are no restrictions, there are no boundaries as to how a deal goes down. The most important part of any deal, and in order for it to come about, is all the parties have to be beneficiaries. And that's one thing that when a company is starting, whether starting up or trying to expand, the principal of the company or the owners of the company, when asking for anything from anyone, whether it be from a customer, from a supplier, from a lender, or from any investor, they have to put themselves in the shoes of the person that they're talking to. And they need to know, would I accept this deal? Why is this deal good for me, the supplier, the lender, etc.? And when they can come to an offer that they know that they would accept, then that's the time to go out there and make that offer. Obviously, no supplier is going to give you terms that are going to hurt the supplier's company, but you can get favors from suppliers if you can craft the terms around a long-term arrangement such that you are showing that you understand that they have a need to make a profit. They have a need to be paid in a timely manner. But sometimes a startup can gain favor by making arrangements with certain suppliers who, you have to instill belief in you and what your company is going to do. That suddenly makes that supplier think, well, geez, this is a tiny guy now or a tiny woman that's starting this business, and they're small, but I believe that they're going to get big, and that's good for me as a supplier because it means big money for me down the road. And that is the relationship that you need to establish, is that everybody around you has to be making money, not just you. And that's how people are able to expand business, is because everyone around them remembers them for what you did for them. That's why the supplier remembers you. That's why the lender remembers you. That's why the broker that brokered the financing remembers you, is because the way you treated them and what you proposed. It has to have details. It has to sound like you really thought it out, and you really thought about all the parties, not just yourself.
Well, that was a lot of stuff you did there. So first, I want to start out with kind of like the startup situation, right? So somebody's starting up, they got a great idea, they think it's the next big thing, right? They think it's a unicorn. 99 times out of, or actually 9 million times out of 9,000,001 times it's not, but they think it's the unicorn. And so they got this great idea for this business. They started it. It's called Widgets International. I think you've heard of that company, Widgets International. And so they just started out. And so now, all right, whatever it is, whether it's retail, wholesale, sales, purchasing, whatever it is, how do they start out? Because you need some money to start it out. Maybe you have $12,000 in your bank account, which is pretty much going to cover you for a week, pretty much. But you don't have a lot of money. How do you start?
Well, there are challenges that startups face. One of the things the startup has to do is they have to look at the reality as to what kind of staying power they have on their own right now. Can they, how are they going to actually pay the basic bills they need to keep their roof over their head and keep the electric on? Can they do that? And how many people around them does this affect? Do they have a spouse? Do they have a girlfriend or boyfriend, roommates that live with them that suddenly, this decision they're making is going to impact that if they can't pay the bills? And therefore, they do need to make sure that they have the capital to get to the point at which positive cash flow is coming in. And to do that is sometimes very difficult for them to understand what that takes, because they oftentimes there are too many entrepreneurs that think that the sales that come in, the revenue that comes in from a sale, is profit. It isn't. That is your money from which you have to pay the business's bills, not your personal bills. And therefore, you really have to be able to draw a line between your personal life and the business, because the business is its own person, and you're the one that is steering that business. It has to be able to survive on its own so that it's not encroaching on your personal funds. But at the same time, your personal life can't encroach upon the business's ability to survive itself, especially in these early stages. So the business has to be able to provide this good or service that you're providing. It has to be able to do it profitably. And that sounds easy, because you say, well, I'm buying it at $1 and I'm selling it at $1.25. But have you worked out what all the costs are that you're incurring in order to deliver that, including the time it takes to get that $1.25 back in after you've sold the goods? Not everyone, if it's at the counter, it's one thing where someone's paying you at the counter, but if you're doing a if you're providing this to another business, this business may not be paying you sooner than 30 days, and 30 days sometimes means 45, even though contractually it's 30. And sometimes businesses will write the agreement and say that we'll pay you in 60 days contractually. So how are you going to survive as you keep putting more and more goods out in the street during this period? So this is all stuff that you need to plan out in advance and put together a very good plan that shows that you understand how much money is going out and when and how much money is coming in. Not how much money is coming in, but when and how much money is coming in. And you need to work out that to find out how big the debt gets of putting goods out there until you get repaid. And if it's 4 weeks out and you're going to sell $1,000 of product every week, then how are you going to be able to buy that $4,000 of product to be able to sell it out there for 4 weeks before the money from 4 weeks ago finally gets repaid to the entity to which you sold it, such as some other business? So planning all of your cash flows out is very important before you go out to someone to ask for money. And who do you go out to ask for money is a question in itself. There are, banking sources that will do small business loans. There are micro loans that can be done rather quickly. They do often ask for some type of collateral. And if someone doesn't have a house or equity in a house, that sometimes leaves them without a source through the bank. Sometimes if you need a piece of equipment for the business and that's why you're going out there to get this money, sometimes there's a leasing company or a bank that would lend you money against the collateral of that equipment. But even then, there's sometimes they're going to ask for you to have maybe 10, 20, 30% of the cost of that piece of equipment as cash that you can put toward it so that the bank, or the lender doesn't feel as though they're the only ones in the deal that have risk. And if you tomorrow wake up and say, you know what, instead of running this business, I'm just going to go out and get a boat and fish. And suddenly now your business, what is the bank going to do with this piece of equipment? They're the only ones that have money in it. And you've kind of left them hanging. And again, it goes back to what I said is if you're going to be in business, you're probably going to be in many businesses over a period of time. And everyone's going to remember you for the way you treated them. And therefore, you got to be respectful of the fact that someone put up money for that. And they kind of need you to have some money in the game, too, to make sure that you're not just going to walk away one day and leave them with a piece of equipment that's not paid for. So the Small Business Administration does have some micro loans. They started out, they're about $50,000. They can go into startups, and in fact, they were originally created for companies that wanted to, people who wanted to start not-for-profit child care centers. And then the program, for some lenders, and when I say the SBA or the Small Business Administration, they're just a guarantor. All these lenders are the ones that really are lending the money, and then they're just getting a guarantee from the government that if you didn't repay it back, the government will repay 70, 75% of what you borrowed, so the lender isn't at full risk. So therefore, lenders can have different programs. So if you talk to one bank and they say, well, no, we don't lend that other than to people that are doing nonprofits or people that are doing child care, some other bank may have expanded that program, and there are some banks that have expanded the microloans into businesses that go beyond that industry and beyond nonprofits, and they will help small startups get a piece of equipment. But again, you have to have the plan. You have to be able to show them what you're going to do with that equipment. One of the things that you'd like to be able to show them is that you've got a customer for whom you're going to take that equipment to serve. So maybe you're buying a pressure washer for a few $100s, and you're going to go clean the sides of buildings. Well, it'd be nice to go to the bank to say that you've spoken to a customer, and if you could buy this power washer, that customer has agreed to pay you a certain amount to clean their building. So now what you're doing is you're working with the customers, and you're going to the bank, and you're able to bring to the bank something that looks like collateral. You're bringing them maybe a purchase order. Maybe this customer wrote something down and gave you a purchase order that says, I will pay you this much to do this job, and they describe the job. So the bank sometimes, there are some banks a little bit more flexible than others, and then there are some private lenders out there who definitely can deal with that situation and look at it and say, well, all right, you're going to have the piece of equipment. We're going to take a lien on that, and this purchase order here, we're going to basically capture the money that comes in from this customer. So when they pay it, we're taking the money, and we'll get paid back, and then what's left over, we'll give to you. And in those sorts of cases, this could be the beginning of going out there and find 5 more customers and going back to the bank and say, hey, I need some extra money to get some attachments and things like that. So working with all the parties that are going to be involved is very important. In fact, even
Glenn, we got to take a quick break. Sorry,
yeah,
I didn't mean to interrupt. We got to take a quick break. You're listening to the Ask Brien Radio Show on KHTS 1220, 98.1 FM. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're listening to the Ask Brien Radio Show on KHTS 1220 and 98.1 FM. Like no other station in the world. It's like no other station in the world. Absolutely. We have quite a cast of characters here. All right.
Leading the pack.
The charge.
Yes.
And speaking of charging, we were just discussing different ways to finance a company, and that is a kind of a charge. Wow. Different way to use a word. All right. Glenn, you're still there.
I am still here.
So you before the break, you were continuing to talk about financing through purchase orders, etc. I want to just quickly finish that up. If you had anything more to say about that, and then I wanted to ask another question.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, very quickly, I was just going to say suppliers. Again, let's stick with the scenario that we're doing with the company that starts out doing power washing. Once you've established yourself a little bit, and we could talk a little bit about credit scores, but let's just say that you've got decent credit. You could go to a store, and I'm just going to name this. I'm not trying to endorse anybody, but let's say you went to a Lowe's or a Home Depot or one of the other companies out there that would sell such equipment. Sometimes they offer programs where you could buy equipment. Let's say you need to expand. You now have so much work. You could sometimes buy that equipment and not pay for it for a year if you've got decent credit. Now, how do you get decent credit? Well, you kind of could go out to some of these free sites like Credit Karma or whatever, check your credit score. You probably want to be in the high 600s or higher. You don't have to be perfect, but if you have decent credit and you could get that, just think about how many buildings you could wash with if you hired 3 people besides yourself, and you've now got three or four pressure washers every day working for a year before you have to pay for them. So this is basically using the supplier's credit, and earlier when we were using the purchase order, you're using the customer's credit because that purchase order is only as good as the customer's credit that gave you that purchase order, that they pay their bills. So where else can you go? Now you've got all these jobs out there that are promised to pay you in 30 days or 60 days, and how can you pull that money out before they pay you? Well, there are companies out there that will buy those receivables. They're referred to as receivables, meaning that this is work that you performed and completed, and the customers agreed to pay to those terms, but they're not due to pay you yet. So how do you get the money that you need to go out and expand the business further? And for that, there are companies, and depending on the size of what you have as far as receivables, maybe it's, if it's only $10,000, $20,000 or $50,000, it may be a little bit difficult, but probably the best source there is your local bank, to go to them and say, listen, I've got receivables. Here's who the clients are. Here's their address. Here's the name of their company. They owe me this money. Would you give me some of that money in advance? And they may give you 80% of it. They may give you 70% of it. depending on how good the customers are and what their credit ratings are. And they may advance that money for you to go out and possibly buy some other piece of equipment. Now, maybe you need a trailer to haul this equipment around to get to all these jobs. So accounts receivable financing is what this is referred to. It can sometimes get confused or interchanged with factoring, and they're not quite the same. They're very similar to the way they operate. Factoring also is giving you your money now, and then they wait to collect it. And, of course, all these people are charging you for giving you money in advance, and that can cost, that's the cost of money. But basically, a factor is actually taking control of your receivables and is often having the money sent to their company, and then they give you the balance of what's left over after the bill's paid back to the factor who advanced the money to you. Accounts receivable is a little bit different. The accounts receivable is there is some company that's going to advance the money to you, but in this case, the money is still being paid to you into your bank accounts, as opposed to being paid to a different company called ABC Factoring Company. Some people don't like the negative connotation of saying, hey, we're doing this work for you, and you need to pay this other company over there. They're a factoring company. Some people feel as though it gives the customer a bad sense that your company is in financial straits or trouble. It's not always the case. Sometimes it can be, because it is true that some people can't get an AR or an accounts receivable line of finance. They have to go to a factor to do it, and factors have a little lower bar. But basically, if you have the choice, especially if it's a very tiny amount of money, and not say tiny in any insulting way, but if it's only like $20,000, $30,000, if you go to your local bank, they may be able to help you in the business finance office there at the bank. They may be able to help you with some type of a loan where they're taking those receivables again as collateral, and they're going to give you maybe 70 cents or 65 or 75 or 80 cents on the dollar, and the rest of it will be collected when the customer pays, and that's when you get your profits, is when the customer pays. Right now you're borrowing against your future receivables. And neither of these, factoring or AR financing, should be confused with the phone calls that many businesses get from lenders that say that they'll put money in your account overnight. And these lenders often are giving loans that are referred to as merchant cash advances, or MCA type of loans. These loans typically are not, first of all, they're not loans, nor are they allowed to be called loans, but we all think of them as you're getting money now and you're paying it back later. So it looks like a loan and it feels like a loan, but it's actually a very, very expensive form of money. And you can, just without getting into a lot of details of it, the rates on this type of money, probably on a good day, because you're savvy and you worked it out, is probably a 30% on an annualized basis cost of money. And it could be 150% cost of money. That's a cost of money basis. It's not a percentage interest rate. It's not a loan, but basically that is what it's costing you to do this. No business can survive at that. Let's just say no business, but let's just say very few could ever survive such a deluge of interest going out the door. And you will know these loans, even if they're not called that, if someone tells you that they can put the money in your account tomorrow, and all they need is 3 bank statements from you. If they only need your 3 bank statements and they're going to put money in your account tomorrow, this is not a form of credit that you probably want as your business. And it's time to hang up the phone and get off that call, because they could possibly persuade you to do this. And another form of financing that people...
We're going to have to take a quick break. I'm sorry.
Go right ahead.
Take a quick break. Our sponsors patiently waiting, can't wait, very excited, has a lot of high energy. And our sponsor is Legal Steps.
I'm doing jumping jacks over here, the high energy.
She just had these signs up. Now.
My turn. No, I did not, Glenn. Okay, so talking about legal steps, really, I think the biggest thing about legal steps is the fact that it's super convenient. And obviously, I speak for everyone, I would assume, when I say that we want convenience. We need convenience in our lives. Everybody is so busy. You have kids, you have a dog, you have several dogs, you have several kids, you have another job, you have a spouse, you have things that need to get done, and you certainly can't be worried about working on someone else's schedule. So how convenient is it that you're able to go to legalsteps.com, that's legalstepz.com, and work at your own pace. I took one of the courses. They offer 3 different courses. I took one of them, and I was able to finish the course in less than 2 hours. I, again, worked at my own pace, picked a Saturday morning. Everybody was kind of chill in the house, and I could kind of work at my own pace, pause, rewind. I was able to take notes. There's a printable workbook that you can kind of scribble and take notes and highlight. And it was really very helpful. I loved the fact that I could see the expert on the screen, and I could see what they were looking at. So if I did get a little bit confused, a little bit like, oh gosh, is this the right thing? Am I filling out this form properly? I was just following along my expert, and I knew exactly that I was doing the right thing. You're able to take a course on registering a trademark, form an S corporation, form an LLC, and these experts that I speak of, by the way, have over 30 years experience, so you know that you're in good hands. This is not some newbie out there kind of guiding you, the blind leading the blind. These are people who know what they're doing, and all of these courses are reviewed by the attorneys. So once again, you know that you're getting the right information and that you're doing it properly. And by the way, if you get to the point where you're just stuck and frustrated and I don't understand what all of this means, they will just do it for you. So there's really no loss for you. The courses are super affordable. They're all under $150. So don't let the cost of something prohibit you from doing what you've been dreaming about doing. You've always wanted your own business. Well, this is your chance. Again, go to legalstepz.com, legalstepz, that's with a Z.com.
Wow, that's exciting.
It is exciting. It's really exciting when you see the expert on the screen and you feel like you're in the room with them. It's great.
And legal is always difficult, so when you have an easy way to do it, it's always...
The legalese can get a little confusing, especially if you're
not... And it's a lot cheaper than the attorney.
With it. Yeah.
Wow, thanks a lot, Jim.
You bet.
All right, back to the Ask Brien show. You're listening to the Ask Brien show on KHTS 1220 and 98.1 FM, and we're going to continue our conversation with Glenn. Glenn, you were... I had interrupted you. I didn't want to interrupt you, but...
That's okay.
Sponsor was like...
I was going to say another lure of financing out there. If anyone's on any kind of social page networks, they often get ads that get targeted toward them to say that there's some overseas bank. They're typically in Middle East, and they want to fund 100% of your business with a 3% loan. And I'm not even quite sure what the game is half the time, whether they're trying to get your IDs, your passport numbers. Some cases, they want you to buy some insurance from some entity, or you need to put up a deposit for the closing of the loan. There is no money there, just to let everyone out there know. There is no loan. There's no prince. There's no bank. There's no lender out there. It's something that many people actually lose some money doing. But I don't want to focus on the negative here, but I just tell people to be aware. And the other thing is in the business, as a startup especially, it can be very difficult. There are times when you just want to give up. And to give you a kind of sense of that is probably the majority of those people who are successful at one point wanted to basically just give up on the business. It was just no more. And I can tell you two in particular. One is Steve Jobs in the 1980s. For those of you way too young on this call to remember the 1980s, in the 1980s, Apple Computer was all it was at the beginning of the 80s, and by the middle of the 80s, it was almost a failed company. They were getting their market share taken by IBM's BIOS chips, and the regular PCs were out there. And in fact, Steve Wozniak of Apple, I think, made the joke once that I think Steve Jobs, when he disappeared from the face of the earth back in the mid-'80s, said that he sold all his Apple shares. Steve Jobs came back and created the largest company in the history of the world from that. And therefore, he was very distraught, and they had to rethink, and they came back and became big. Another company that no one would have ever heard of if somebody gave up just because they were worn down by the system of no's is Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos is someone that everyone knows is the founder of Amazon. Amazon is the largest retailer in the history of the world, and Amazon was funded by Bezos going to no less than 180 different private equity firms, venture capital firms. He was told no 179 plus times before someone said, I like the idea, we'll put the money up. And that takes a long time to go to 180 firms. You figure that's at minimum 180 days. That's a half a year, and it's much longer than that he spent. So that idea would have never come about. Amazon would have never been created, or maybe it would have been by somebody else in a different way. But basically, that's what starting a business is like. It's hearing a lot of no's, dealing with a lot of problems, and you are a problem solver, whether you're solving the problem for the customer, whether you're solving the problem for the lender, whether you're solving the problem for the employee. It's a series of problem-solving episodes that is running a business. And it is not, it's not something that agrees with everyone, but it's something that takes a lot of stamina, a lot of tenacity, and you got to be someone that basically can hear no and understand failure after failure after failure to be able to succeed. And there are many, many other stories out there of people that have failed, failure upon failure upon failure before they actually finally got the business the right way, working the correct way. They got the right product, or they got the right system down. They learned from a lot of mistakes, which, sometimes we refer to as life's tuition. And that's something that also, as far as funding goes, you just can't take no. You just got to keep going out there. And each time you go out there, you should learn something, not just hear no. You should find out why. And from that, you correct it so that the next person you talk to, you've got that defect corrected.
We got to take a break.
Soon,
Sorry, we got to take a break. Listen to the Ask Brien radio show on KHTS 1220, 98.1 FM. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're listening to the Ask Brien radio show on KHTS 1220 and 98.1 FM. And we do have a co-host. Is she there?
I am here.
I thought you were sleeping.
No, I was studying. This has been such great information. I've just been taking so many great notes, and I know everyone else that's been listening is doing the same. So, Glenn, I do have a question for you. You've provided us so many great funding options, and I really appreciate actually the cautionary tales as well, because for small business owners, I know there could be some times where you feel really frantic and you don't want to make poor choices, so I'm really glad you were able to give us some of the cautionary insights. So what are maybe some alternate options that you haven't covered that would be feasible for businesses to scale?
Sure. So you go into a business, sometimes you might find that there's a business that has an older owner that, wants to sell at some point. He doesn't have a successor. And you could go into that business and make a deal and say, hey, how about if I come in here and build out your business and grow your business, and then I'm going to buy you out, and make a deal where there's a certain amount of the expansion of his business that gets credited towards you, and you can use that as equity toward the purchase of that business with a lender. I know of lenders that will fund 90% of such a situation. Or find possibly who the contractors out there that are doing work for the government, whether it be the state or the federal government. And a lot of those large contractors are looking for small businesses to provide a good or service to them. it gets them, the large contractor gets kind of like points. It kind of improves their score with the government to get contracts. And they've got contracts that might be hundreds of millions of dollars that for them to give you a contract for $100,000 would be to their benefit, and they'd love to have you grow with them and be able to provide more and more services. Some of them even have set-asides where they need to find a small business or a business that's owned by a veteran or a disabled veteran or a Native American, et cetera, a woman. There are a number of contracts that are devised that way. So these are all other ways to get into being in business without having to have a lot of capital. You become your own capital, you become your own equity, not just sweat equity, but your expertise and whatever good you can bring to these people. So whether it be the small business guy that you're buying out because he doesn't have a successor and he may just be closing down when he retires, to the large contractor who is doing, maybe $1 billion in contracts, but one of his people there would love to have a small business say, hey, we're capable of doing this, and we're going to come and do a really good job for you. Would you give us some of your contract work? And you'd be surprised, and you may have to ask 180 of them, just like Jeff Bezos. But eventually, you will get one that says, sure, we could use the help, and they will basically hire your business. There are many creative ways to go about that.
Those are some really good ways to be able to think alternatively to getting funding. And I just want to say, I know that there's so much more we could continue this conversation, but what would be the best way for someone to get in touch with you if they wanted to find out more or get further insight?
Sure. I'd be more than happy to entertain questions from anyone out there that I wasn't able to address today. They could mail me at an email address that I use for this type of situation. It's avatarfinancialconsultants, plural, @gmail.com. And it's AVATAR, and then the word financial, and then the word consultants. And that there, if they put in the subject line, Ask Brien, I will basically sort those emails to make sure that I address them, especially. I'd be more than happy to help out.
That's fantastic. Well, you've been an amazing guest today, and just want to remind everybody that email address and all of the other resources mentioned will be in the show notes for the podcast. And you can find the Ask Brien podcast, and that's AskBrien. And you can find the Ask Brien podcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Peter?
Wow, thank you very much. You've been listening to the Ask Brien radio show on KHTS 1220 and 98.1 FM. Over and out. Dun 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 dun.